Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, coming at you with another review. And yes, I know I still have Universal films to get to, but I just knocked out the Hammer Frankenstein series. I've already started Dracula, so I figured why not just get through Dracula. I do have Brides of Dracula, but I'm skipping over it for now because it's not terribly vital, except for the fact that it does have Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. And I do not own the Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. That one generally isn't considered part of the series. It's also a martial arts film, which I'm not really into. So I'll be skipping that one just for now. Maybe someday I'll get to it. But I have done Horror of Dracula and Prince of Darkness, so now I am up to Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. The fourth film released, but the third of the series, the third to feature Christopher Lee. It was released in 1967, I believe. Could be wrong. Prince of Darkness was 66, so this was 68. This was the first Hammer film or the first Dracula film to not be directed by Terence Fisher. It was directed by Freddie Francis, who has actually directed a lot of other horror films. His first one, which was actually his directorial debut, I believe, was The Evil of Frankenstein. He went on to win Oscars for Sons and Lovers and Glory. But he was also a cinematographer. Wait, was it for directing? Okay, Sons and Lovers and Glory, he won the Oscar for cinematography. And you can tell that in this film because the differences between Fisher and Francis is definitely, there's a lot more cinematography going on. Definitely more usage of lights and filters and angles. I think Fisher has a more raw approach to filming, which I'll get into. This is also one of the rare occasions where I actually like the later artwork for the cover more than the original, because the original U.S. theatrical release poster almost feels like a parody, because it says Dracula has risen from the grave, and then underneath the parentheses it just says obviously. Almost feels like something a Monty Python would do, which this is British, but this was a year before Monty Python. But the cover almost makes it look like a 60s Roman Polanski, like a melodrama thriller. Not the biggest fan of that cover, at least not for a Dracula film. But of course, returning is Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. And I've heard two things about Lee with Dracula. I heard that when it came to this film, Hammer didn't really want Christopher Lee back because of how, he's not afraid to speak his mind. He's not shy about his opinions. Like with Prince of Darkness, if you go by the theory of him saying, I'm not saying this dialogue, this is crap, I'm just gonna hiss and scream, being kind of difficult to work with. But I also heard that Hammer was pretty much begging him to come back because Lee was always reluctant to do Dracula again and again. He felt Hammer was wasting their time with Dracula. And from what he said over the years was, the way Hammer put it to him was, if he didn't come back to do Dracula, they couldn't do Dracula, and he'd be putting people out of work. So, as big of a horror icon as he is, especially for having probably the biggest legacy of Dracula, arguably, he definitely played him the most. He was always very reluctant. So, this film picks up from Prince of Darkness, and I have to say, I actually enjoyed Dracula's Risen from the Grave. At first, it did grab me. It is a slower pace. The first half is a lot slower, but once the plot gets going, it actually is quite interesting, and they do some interesting stuff with the characters that I really enjoyed. It definitely feels more like a sequel than... Because Hammer has a knack for doing contradicting sequels. Like, either sort of flubbing the ending of the last one, or just doing contradicting things with, you know, characteristics of the characters, or sort of how they got to where they are. But I believe this was also the first film where they went from Bray Studios to Elstree Studios, which, well, actually, this was shot at Pinewood Studios, which was in Buckinghamshire. So I guess Elstree must have come later. But, you know, the last two Christopher Lee films was shot at Bray Studios. So there were some things different. Like, previously you had a road that you could take to the castle. And you had the big ice-covered moat that Count Dracula died in. Here, though, it is a rocky, mountainous terrain that you have to climb to get to the castle. The moat is more like a little stream. So that's changed. But I would say the look of the landscape of the castle, with the jagged rocks and the dangerous terrain to get there, looks beautiful. It's got more of a gothic look. The matte paintings in this film are, I think, maybe a little bit better than the ones done at Bray Studios. They're definitely more frame-worthy. Like, you could print them off and frame them more so than you can the ones done at Bray Studios. So the story of this one, the opening is a contradiction, because it opens up with this altar boy going to a church, his church, and he goes to ring the church bells, and blood drips down. And so when the priest gets there, he goes up to the bell, and this dead girl falls out. And she's got these bite marks with purple, well done makeup, purple discoloration. Clear indicator she's been killed by Dracula. But, you know, it's possible that that didn't happen from what we saw in Prince of Darkness. She's not a character from Prince of Darkness. So, I mean, it's kind of unnecessary. But it helps start it off with a bang. Then we pick up a year later. The villagers are still superstitious about Dracula. So this Monsignor, if I pronounce that right, which is it's an honorary stance in the Catholic Church. I believe Catholic Church. I don't really know much about churches, so the Monsignor is, you know, kind of like an archbishop or a cardinal. It's a high-ranking position. He decides to climb up to the castle and exorcise it. And there is a priest that goes along with him. Monsignor is played by Rupert Davies, and the priest is played by Ewan Hooper. The priest gets scared and tries to go back down the mountain, but he falls and he lands on the ice where Dracula is. And he gets an injury, he bleeds, and the blood goes through the crack in the ice and conveniently lands in Dracula's mouth, which revives him. But we also see Dracula's reflection on the ice and the water, which contradicts the whole thing about vampires and reflections. But Monsignor does make it up to the castle. He says a prayer and puts a giant crucifix on the gate, barring Dracula from it. Dracula becomes master. He enslaves the priest. Says, who's done this, and he tells them who. So they have to travel to this other place. I'm not very good with European town names, so they go to Keinenberg. Where he lives with his widowed sister-in-law Anna, played by Marion Matthey. And I guess it could be her father. I thought it was her uncle. But the Monsignor's niece is played by, her name is Maria, played by Veronica Carlson. This was Veronica Carlson's first of 3 Hammer films. There was this, there was Dracula Must Be Destroyed, and then Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and then Horror of Frankenstein, which she's not a big fan of the latter. I liked her in this film. She's a very good actress. Her character might not be as deep or layered as Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, but she was still a strong character. She's in love with this scholar named Paul, played by Barry Andrews, who works at this tavern. And he works with this tavern girl named Xena, played by Barbara Ewing, which I have heard that name before. She was in The Torture Garden for Amicus, Dracula's Risen from the Grave for Hammer. She was in movies The Reckoning, Eye of the Needle, and When the Whales Came. Comedy series Brass, Comrade Dad. She had a one-woman show. Okay, I know I've heard that name before. Well, Dracula gets a hold of her, and he enslaves her. And kind of interesting thing about her character is she's in love with Paul, even tries to, get with him, but then Maria comes in while he's drunk. Which, there's this great scene where Maria has Paul over, and Monsignor asks him, he keeps poking at him about his faith, and he asks him. And Paul, who's a very respectable young man, or respectful young man, he tries to tell him that he's an atheist. But, he doesn't, he tries to tell him in the most polite way possible. Monsignor flips out. They ask him to leave. And I really like that scene because it's great acting by Rupert Davies and Barry Andrews. The whole atheist thing plays in very well with the final showdown with Dracula. But so Xena loves Paul, but he rejects her because of Maria. So then when the priest tells Dracula about Monsignor's niece, because the whole thing of him going there is to get revenge on the Monsignor for exercising his castle. He wants the niece. He wants Maria. So he commands Xena to bring her to him, and she kind of is like, why do you want her? You have me. So it's like, whether she's human or an enslaved vampire, it's like someone always wants Maria more than her. Which, there's this great scene where Dracula just wants to do away with her because she fails to bring Maria to him. So, like, he does, like, his hypnotic gaze, and he gets closer, and she kind of starts to smile. But then we get the up close of his bloodshot eyes, and there's this wonderful red light filter on her, kind of like a creep show shot, and she screams. So then when the priest comes in and finds her, she's got like this Joker smile with the vampire fangs and blood, and Dracula sleeping with blood coming out of his mouth. That's another thing about Freddie Francis is the color filters. You know, when we get the up close of Dracula's bloodshot eyes, which look great in this movie, there's like this hint of green, this green light, or even when we just see Dracula on screen, which isn't often. He doesn't have a lot of lines. He doesn't have a lot of screen time. This one's more devoted to the characters, which I guess would be more akin to the original novel, because the novel's more about, you know, Jonathan Harker and the other characters. But there's like this green tint that's usually around Dracula, and just the use of colors and light, Francis is great at, you know. It's one of the great things about having a cinematographer be a director, is you just get the extra layer of how to make shots look great. Of course, Dracula does get a hold of Maria. He does turn her into, you know, his next slave. And when the whole atheist thing comes into play, is they kind of tweak the lore of Dracula and vampires, because before you could just use a stake and through the heart and it would kill him. But this is actually a shot from the film. When Paul goes to stake him, he doesn't have faith, so it doesn't work. You have to pray while you're doing it. So it just added this layer of difficulty for how Paul can stop him, which I thought was interesting, because, you know, one reason why this film is more original than some of the others, or at least some of the others before it, is because you don't have these vampire hunters or occultists going after Dracula. You don't have the ignorant travelers and wanderers ending up at the castle. It's just a guy who knows nothing about vampires or Dracula. He's an atheist, so even when he learns how to stop a vampire, it doesn't work because he doesn't have faith. But, so Dracula has Maria. He takes her up to the castle and, you know, has her remove the cross, which, great foreshadowing, because when she throws it over the cliff, of course it lands straight, sticks into the ground, right side up. And Ewan Hooper as the priest does a great job with his confliction. You know, he's compelled to obey Dracula, but his faith is also getting in the way. Because, like, there's a part where he tries to go get Maria from her bedroom, but she has a crucifix, and it's kind of repelling him. Not so much because he's a vampire slave, but it's because, you know, he can't sort of go against the cross, I guess, or defile. Well, not really defile, but he did a great job with his confliction. And with the final battle between Paul and Dracula, spoilers, 'cause this is one that I would encourage people to see as well, even though I pretty much gave away the whole movie. Well, if you're listening to a review of a sequel, you've probably already seen the film, but Dracula lands on, he gets flipped over the railing, over the cliff, and he lands on the cross, being impaled straight through, which looks great. The shot looks kind of cheesy, like from above. It looks like he's standing on his feet, just kind of like leaning backwards. But, so, 2 impaling scenes, blood coming from the neck. Even when he's on the cross, the priest gives a prayer so that, the impaling would actually work. He starts bleeding from his eyes. This film was rated G, which this was the first year of the MPA ratings board. Maybe they didn't know what they were thinking, but yeah, this is rated G, which is the equivalent of like a Disney movie. Which, 4 years later, Conquest for the Planet of the Apes, which is one of my favorite films of that series. I love Planet of the Apes. That's also rated G, and that's a fairly bloody film too. But, yeah, somehow this one was rated G. But, Taste the Blood of, Scars of, and I believe Prince of Darkness are all rated R. 1972 is PG. Yeah, I don't think they really quite had the ratings down yet. Especially with a fucking poster like this. Does that look like a G-rated film? Can you imagine taking your kids to see that? But anyway. And then that's the end of the movie. I thought this film was fairly original in the way that they, in the beginning, of course, it feels redone. He's resurrected again. He makes women their slaves, and someone's got to stop him. But, the fact that he's after revenge because, someone tried to put a stop to the superstition around him, and the guy that has to stop him is an atheist, which, again, adds that layer of difficulty, that layer of depth to his character and his relationship with Dracula. I thought that was very clever. It added a freshness to a Dracula film. And, again, even though the first half was kind of slow, I really got invested to it once the plot started getting put together. I liked the direction by Freddie Francis, his use of colors, filters, angles. Like, I really liked the up close. It was kind of like, it kind of brought back to Bela Lugosi, whether it be Dracula or White Zombie, just the up close of his eyes to show he's hypnotizing and entrancing a victim. Which I guess there's a couple legends as to why Terrence Fisher did not direct this one, but he would direct films after it. One story is that he was an unreliable drunk and he just couldn't do it. He was on a drinking binge for a period. Then another one was that he had an accident where his leg got broken and he was out of commission for a while. But either way, I really liked the style of direction and cinematography brought on by Freddie Francis. I noticed his direction and style in this more than I did Evil of Frankenstein. I actually liked this film more of Evil of Frankenstein, and I'm more of a Frankenstein guy myself. So I was actually quite impressed with this movie. At first, it was kind of, I expected it to be a little bit boring. The inconsistencies with, how we got from that film to this film didn't really bother me. or the sort of contradictions with, like, you know, having to pray with the stake or seeing his reflection didn't really bother me. I'm pretty used to the fact that Hammer kind of fudges some stuff here and there. The short performance that Christopher Lee had as far as screen time and dialogue, he still made the best of it, and he was still very much Dracula. And I just really enjoyed this movie. I thought this was a very worthy and surprising sequel. Anyway, that is Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Thank you for watching.